Okay, friends, we are still having trouble with Wi-Fi, and they're going to work on that. We're going to go ahead and start. If you know somebody that couldn't be here and they're texting you saying, why isn't this being live streamed? One of the things that I would share with them is even if the live stream doesn't get the first part of this, it will be recorded. So if people miss anything, they can go back and watch that. Here's what I intend for us to follow tonight. Number one is I appreciate all the questions that I have received since last Thursday's meeting. And the thing I want to start off with is by giving answer to those questions as best as I'm able to. Then I want to make some responses to some of the things that were said, primarily because it didn't have the context, and I think that some of that is important. I will also share with you some things, because all we've done so far is share information about the disaffiliation process. I have emailed the DS saying we need to be able to tell people what to expect, and I sent him a list of questions, and he did not respond, so I sent him again today and said, hey, we still need answers to those. He said, I'm out of town. You'll either have them tonight or you'll have them tomorrow. So whatever I tell you about the process is what I imagine will happen, but if that doesn't line up with our superintendent's idea of what needs to happen, then that will be different. And then lastly, again, we've talked about disaffiliation, but the motion from our leadership is that we also join the GMC, and I'm just going to give a few reasons of why that is. So as we get started, Josh, I'm going to ask you if you would open us up in prayer, and I believe the floor mic is there. We will have time for questions and answers tonight.
Oh, there we go. All right, yeah, let's pray. Loving God, we love you. We thank you for this time together. We thank you for what you're doing in this church, and we just place our complete trust in you. We know, Lord, that you have big plans for this church, the ministry of this church, and we invite your Holy Spirit to continue to move, for you to be present tonight as we ask difficult questions, as we have difficult discussions, Lord. We pray that it would be all for your glory. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so the first question that somebody asked of me is, they said, it seems like all this is happening very fast. Why is this happening so fast? Let me share with you the timeline that church leadership wanted. We actually made the request on July 1st for the superintendent to set a date for a church conference so we could take a vote. However, we also said, if that's not the direction we go, then we can always cancel that. That's not a problem. It's always scheduling that is the problem. We did not get a reply for 59 days to that. Part of that is because the superintendent was getting ready to take renewal leave, and when he got back, I said, hey, we still haven't received a date. So the plan of our leadership was, let's get it scheduled. If it changes, it changes. But this is happening fast because the setting of those dates was not within our control. Also, the date changed. Originally, we were told that the last day that you could vote for this October session would be about, what's today, the 13th, 9 days from now. And then somebody came and told me, well, we heard it was the 15th, and they had changed the date, and it was. So this Thursday when we vote, we will be the last church that votes prior to the October annual conference. Second question that people want to know, this is a great question, is what will change at St. Andrews if we disaffiliate? And the answer is, to the naked eye, very little will change. We're still going to gather like we do on Sunday mornings. You'll still have Sunday school. You'll still have Bible study. We'll still have 3 worship services. We're still going to have a mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ. We'll still have a method of helping people to know, grow, and go in Christ. We'll still have a vision of being a loving, caring, overcoming community of faith centered in a relationship with Jesus Christ. That stuff that is part of our DNA is not going to change. Whatever happens Thursday night, we will have 3 worship services to focus on who God is and what God has done for us. On the other hand, though, there would be some changes that have to happen. If we choose to disaffiliate, we have to reincorporate as a church. Right now, we are incorporated as a United Methodist Church. If we disaffiliate, we can no longer do that. There's actually a disaffiliation agreement that says things like, if you want to keep a few of your hymnals with the cross and flame, you can do that. If you want to keep your pew Bibles with the cross and flame, you can keep some of those. A lot of the disaffiliation agreement is stuff that has never happened here at St. Andrews. But if you park in guest parking, you'll notice it says United Methodist. We'll have to change that. If there's a cornerstone in a church where it's engraved, founded on this date, we don't lose that. It's part of our history. So some things will change. The primary thing is we can no longer use the name United Methodist. We can no longer use the cross and flame as a logo, and the polity of our church will change. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So the question is, and I think we have a slide for this, is, so what are our options as a church? The biggest question that was asked of me after Thursday was, if you look at pages 10 and 11 of the document that they gave us, can you answer some of those questions? So if I don't answer them specifically the way you're hoping to, ask it again because I want to give you the right information. The first option is to remain part of the United Methodist Church. Now, that's a very attractive option to some people because that's what part of your identity is. I can assure you, it is a big part of my identity. And yet, the United Methodist Church, beyond 2022, is going to change. It's going to look a lot different than it did in the 1990s. It's going to look a lot different than it did in the first decade of this millennia. And because of this, here's a stat that was given to me by Bob Long. I think a lot of y'all, if you don't know Bob, never met Bob, never seen Bob on TV, perhaps you've heard him on the radio. And he gave a statistic in a meeting we had a few weeks ago. It was a district meeting that's really pretty shocking. He said at the end of 2023, so 16 months from now, average worship attendance in the Oklahoma Conference will decrease by 45.4%. That is because of disaffiliation, and it is because of church decline. Membership, worship attendance continues to trend downward. 45.4% average worship attendance. And the projection is that by 2030, the Oklahoma Conference, of which we are a part, will only be 25% of its current size. That is primarily due to decline in the church. So, to remain, it was said in the presentation that most UMC congregations will remain UMC. There's a couple of different reasons for that. Some just want to stay UMC. That will probably be the biggest reason. The other is some churches that want to disaffiliate cannot afford it. They don't have the money to pay the exit fees for that. But I would suggest to you, while the number of churches may primarily remain United Methodist, it's not the number of churches that's important. It's the size of those churches that are important. That figures into what Bob had said. I know that the conference is already trying to plan a budget because a conference budget will be voted on in October, and they've already said we better plan on at least 20% decrease in revenues for the ministries that we have. Second option, wait for 2024 and General Conference to see what's going to happen. I think that it is quite likely in 2024 that there will still be an exit fee or an exit path written in the Book of Discipline. I don't think they're going to say no, churches that haven't been able to leave have to stay. I don't think that will happen. I think there will still be an exit plan, but I don't know what it will look like. I don't know, based on what other conferences are doing, if it will be as friendly as it is right now. There are 19 annual conferences in the United States that are adding additional financial cost to churches disaffiliating. I don't know if that will be a trend or if it's not a trend, but whatever the path is, I'm pretty confident it will be different. I'm also confident that the statements on sexuality, which are the very headline-grabbing kind of statements, it is likely what the United Methodist Church currently has is going to change. And the reason is because most of the churches in the United States that are keeping that are conservative churches. When they leave, their votes leave. And that makes it easier for the people that want to change the discipline to change the discipline. And then the last option for us is to disaffiliate. And I put join another denomination because that is the recommendation of our church leadership. And so I think you know about that. I don't want to say anything more about that. Another question in the document, there's a whole section on what are called Connectional Expectations. And this has to do with the ministries that we support and what's going to happen to them. What happens with Circle of Care? What happens with Skyline Urban Ministries? What happens with Oklahoma Camping Ministries, etc.? Well, a text, I think, went out, went out about youth camp, and I've asked Josh to speak about what's going to go on with camp. So why don't you share that with him?
So going into Journey Camp this summer, Journey Camp is the camp that we take our middle school students to. Going into that this summer, the leadership of Journey Camp had already kind of been discussing and thought that there was a chance this was going to be the last year for Journey Camp. It had shrunk to, there were less than 60 students at Journey this summer, and half of those students were from St. Andrews. And so less churches, less students, less leadership. We just felt like that this was possibly the last year for Journey Camp. And so that was all aside and had nothing to do with this disaffiliation stuff. While the Journey Camp design team has not met yet to officially make any decisions, through prayer and discussion, talking with DA and others, we just felt like we needed to find and move on to a camp that was going to be better for our students. And so we're actually going to be going back to Disciple Camp this next summer. And the reason I say back to is because that's the middle school camp that we were a part of before Journey Camp started 10 or so years ago. And so it's a camp that is made up of 15 to 20 Methodist churches here in Oklahoma. And they had a little over 200 middle school students at the camp this last summer. It meets at Heart of Hills Campground in Tahlequah. And so that decision has been made, and we're going to be moving to Disciple Camp this summer. In addition to that, there is another day spring. And so a lot of the same churches that are part of Disciple Camp are a part of Day Spring. Not Day Spring South, but the other Day Spring that meets at Sky Ranch. And through more discussion and prayer, we felt like it made sense now. We felt like Day Spring South was not too far behind Journey Camp. It had seen quite a bit of decline over the last few years. And it was, I think we had right at or just under 100 students at Day Spring South this summer. And 40 of those were from St. Andrews. And it has just kind of continued to decline. And we anticipate some other changes coming. And so we felt like it made sense if we're going to be making the change with Disciple Camp and partnering with those 15 to 20 churches, made sense for us to go ahead and do that with Day Spring as well. Day Spring is similar in size to Disciple. They had about 200 high school students from those 15 to 20 churches. And they meet at Sky Ranch up in northeast Oklahoma. And so both of those decisions were in the process and in the works of praying through and deciding before we had any dates set on voting, disaffiliation, any of those things. It was just mainly looking at the direction and the decline of those camps and comparing them to other options that we felt like would be more fruitful and a better experience for our students. Even though Journey and Day Spring South have been great experiences for our students. I've been a part of Day Spring South well before I came here. DA actually helped start Day Spring South. It's not that it was a bad camp. We just felt like with the decline that was coming, that it was time to make the move to two camps that, while they are made up of Methodist churches, are not a part of the Oklahoma Conference. They're not considered a conference camp. And so we wouldn't have that issue. So those are camps that we're going to be going to regardless of the disaffiliation. That decision was made apart from the things going on that we'll be voting on Thursday.
And I can tell you that Disciple Camp for the junior high students was the camp we went to prior to the start of Journey. So it's familiar territory. Skyline Urban Ministries, every February, we have Thanksgiving in February. We take that food to Skyline. I'm here to tell you, if we choose to take food to Skyline, they're not going to say, nope, we don't want it. Any ministry of compassion and mercy, whether it's Circle of Care, Skyline Urban Ministry, Criminal Justice and Mercy Ministries, we can still participate in those. Even though they're United Methodist Ministries, if we disaffiliate, they're not going to turn us away, because United Methodism does have a bit of an ecumenical experience in it. They will also most gladly take any money that we give, because they're all 501c3 corporations. Speaking of money, the next part was in financial support, that boards, ministries, and agencies of the United Methodist Church are supported through money which each local church has a share to pay. These are what we call apportionments. We pay our apportionments. There are also additional ministries, and most of the apportionment money goes outside the state of Oklahoma. We also have in the state of Oklahoma a number of ministries, camps, Circle of Care, those kind of things, that we also support, but those are no longer called apportionments. Those are called mission and ministry. For our 2022 budget, the apportionments and mission and ministry is about 15.5% of our budget. It's $181,000 and change. If we were to choose to disaffiliate and join the GMC, that number goes down to 6.5%, or about $100,000 that we would have, that we could use to continue to be in mission in other places, or we can build up some of the ministries in our church that typically are underfunded. And I got to get my glasses on because I can't read my notes. One of the things about the apportionment ministries, because most of those are outside our conference, those are things like our seminaries. We support, I think, 13 seminaries, United Methodist seminaries. We have general boards and agency. Westpath used to be called the General Board of Pensions and Health Benefits. We have the General Board of Church and Society, the General Board of Discipleship. All those things are part of institutional overhead. It's a very bloated kind of process, and those ministries actually do very little to help us accomplish our mission. So when we look at the financial implications, that changes. What we don't want to change is our focus to support things missionally. Denominational group benefits. Joining a new denomination will continue to allow benefits of tax exemption, workers' compensation, and other benefits. If we were to be independent, we lose all that. We join another denomination, we have the benefits of that denomination. And then lastly, in that document, it talked about Christian education, curriculum, and programming. And part of what you'd want to know is we really don't use it. A lot of our curriculum, a lot of our Bible studies are not published by the United Methodist Publishing House, but the United Methodist Publishing House is a business, just like Lifeway. You know, y'all remember when Lifeway used to have stores, and y'all went in there and you bought your books and spent your money and supported the Baptist church, and you felt good about it. We could continue to use whatever curriculum is out there because we would be allowed to do that. So I think that's most of the stuff. There was some other stuff on page 10 that really talked about clergy benefits and all that. I didn't figure y'all would be interested, but if you are, you can ask questions later. Okay, let me talk about the responses to last Thursday's meeting by the transitional ministry team. One of the things that you certainly need to know is Tish Malloy and I consider each other friends, and we frequently joke that we're on different sides of the issue. She even made a joke. She goes, DA, I'm going to take him here and I'm going to turn left. And she was joking when she said that because we have that kind of a relationship. Victor McCullough is a colleague. But I hope that you have heard, I hope you've grabbed onto when I preach, that one of the worst things that happens in a church is when a church has conflicting visions. When there are conflicting visions, that produces chaos and conflict and confusion. Tish and Victor are friends and colleagues, and we have conflicting visions of what the church should be. I do believe they spoke honestly last week. I don't think they said anything that was untrue in their understanding, and yet some of the stuff I have a different narrative to. So let me comment on those. The presentation began with Tish sharing the results of the vote at the 2019 special session of General Conference that was supposed to settle all things, and that's when we voted the traditional plan, which is a current stance in the United Methodist Church. She said that she showed the slide of the vote. The traditional plan passed 53% to 47%. And then she made the comment that people thought 47% was a significant number that certainly said the church wanted to be more inclusive, so we, quote, have to pay attention to that. 47% is a significant number. I do not dispute that at all. But it ignored the fact that 53% was the majority and determined our stance. The UMC spoke with an official voice. General Conference is the official voice of the United Methodist Church, and yet the presentation began by saying, but we're paying attention to the unofficial minority report. I think that's important for us to know. Also, when we talk about General Conference, I realize you get this glazed look in your eyes and it just goes over your head because General Conference is a nameless, faceless group to most everybody here. Is that accurate? It is not a nameless, faceless group to me. I was elected as part of the delegation in 2008, 2012, 2016, which meant 2019, and I'm currently on the delegation for the 2020 General Conference. With our delegation from Oklahoma, I know all these people, I interact with these people. It's not a nameless group. Now, that may sound a little more important than it is because actually I'm an alternate delegate. But I'm on the delegation, and if I go to General Conference, at some point somebody's going to say, I'm tired, I just want to go back to my hotel. DA, come vote in my place. So yes, I have been on the floor and voted at General Conference. I have made relationships with people. I have been in the legislative sessions when things have been debated as to whether or not they're going to come to the plenary session to be voted on. So if you only have one name and one face, I hope you don't puke when you see the face, nor throw up a little in your mouth when you say the name. 47% again of General Conference is a significant number. But that 47% represents the churches that are acting in disobedience and defiance of our book of discipline. They are the people that are saying, no, we're not going to do this. To me, again, that is a significant number. The next thing, it was said that the next General Conference is in 2024, and we've got to decide if it's postponed or if it's canceled. That's not true. The group that puts on or decides when we have General Conference is the General Commission on General Conference. And they said we will postpone General Conference until 2024. So even though that's when it's going to be, it is not the 2024 General Conference. It is the 2020 General Conference that is held in 2024. The delegates have already been elected to that. The struggle is some people think we should re-elect delegates because churches are disaffiliating and delegates are leaving. Well, according to the Book of Discipline, you can't do that. However, with the Judicial Council rulings that we can have jurisdictional conference in November, which is against the Book of Discipline, it is possible that it will be canceled and it's a new 2024 General Conference. That means new delegates have to be elected. The people currently on the delegation are not, they would have to be reelected to be able to serve. Third question, and there were a lot of things. I'm just trying to hit the ones that may be most pertinent. The question was asked if we know of any violations by Oklahoma clergy to our current stance on sexuality since 2016. She did mention that there was a clergy that did a same-gender wedding in 2018. What I will tell you, I say this in conversation, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. I know that person. I have a copy of the marriage license because somebody sent it to me, and I felt Scripture said I needed to go talk to that person, so that's what I did. And, you know, my thing was, you need to be accountable. You need to confess what you've done. Somehow or another, other people found out. I don't know how it got the bishop's attention. That person contacted me today and just said, "Hey, how you doing? Want you to know I'm praying for you." And I said, "Thanks. I'm tired, but how are you doing? Because I've been praying for you too." We have different visions for the church. I did not know there was a retired clergy that had done a same-gender wedding, so I don't know anything about that, but I did really appreciate the honesty in saying there was one, now there's two incidents that we know about. The other incident that was mentioned was a transgender clergy, and it was just said, but that's about to change, which I thought was dismissive. Oh, we've got this, but it's going to change, so we're not going to worry about it. I want to tell you about that person, and some of you already know this. That person is a very long-time, close friend of mine. He was one of my college students that I hired to be an intern, and I was his mentor. It was when he was in college that I said, you know what, I think God's calling you into pastoral ministry. You need to begin to think about that and pray about that. And that was the path that he took. I did his premarital counseling. I did his wedding. I even was an assisting elder in his ordination. This is somebody I have a long, strong relationship with. When he first started getting into a dark place in life, he texted a bunch of us, about 5 of us, and said, my therapist said, I need a circle of trust. Y'all are my circle of trust. If you don't want to be in this, that is fine. I wasn't going to abandon my friend. And he came out and he said, you know, y'all need to know I'm a cross-dresser. To me, there are more unusual things to try to understand. That didn't make sense to me, but it certainly didn't affect my opinion of my friend. It went from cross-dresser to transgender very quickly. During a darker time, left ministry. Wife said, I can stay with you if you're just one or the other. I can't stay with you if you're both. They moved out of state, and he called one night, and I talked him off the ledge because he wanted to kill himself. It was a hard thing. I could go on, but what I will tell you now is she identifies as a transgender female, and she is still married to her wife. That makes it a same-gender wedding that violates our book of discipline. I would never file charges against my friend. But if it came to a vote on that person being exited out of ministry, I would be compelled to vote yes. And she knows that. Many times I just say, you're my friend, I love you, and that's all that we need to worry about. The whole thing about, well, that's going to take care of itself. No. You don't walk with my friend. You don't know what she's going through. It's very hard. The last thing I'll comment on from the other night is it was said that there was a moratorium that said we're not going to file charges against each other. And she looked at me, I remember this very clearly, and she said, but the WCA said the moratorium is over. You need to know that is 100% true, that that's what the WCA did. They said the moratorium on filing charges is over. But that was not an action, that was a reaction. It was when the centrists and progressives said, we're pulling out of the protocol. We will no longer support it. And that's when the WCA said, okay, well then the moratorium is over. The moratorium was not an official stance of the denomination. General Conference did not vote on it. It was kind of a polite agreement because everybody thought the protocol was going to pass. And so they said, we'll play nice. But the indication was it was an official thing and the WCA wrecked it. That is not the full context of what happened. All right, let me get a drink, take a deep breath, and we'll talk about voter preparation. Y'all can go ahead and put that slide up there if you want, guys. Anything I tell you tonight could quite possibly change because the district superintendent has not approved this. But here's some things that I would help you know. Paragraph 2553 states that we may disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church, quote, for reasons of conscience regarding a change in the requirements and provisions of the Book of Discipline in regards or related to the practice of homosexuality, or the ordination or marriage of self-avowed practicing homosexuals as resolved and adopted by the 2019 General Conference, or the actions or inactions of its annual conference related to this issue. 1 or 2 or 3. Is that helpful? The reason our discernment team and leadership went was for number 3. The actions and inactions in our annual conference related to these issues. Another one of the issues is our conference sent a delegation to Wichita, Kansas in 2016 to elect bishops. It was our jurisdiction that filed the complaint with the Judicial Council that said, we do not believe the election of Karen Olivito is legitimate. Please review this. That was something that we did, and what they have done in the Western jurisdiction has defied, again, our church discipline. We believe that church leadership in our conference has not acted in such a way, or it has acted in other ways that are related to this issue. As we've said before, our system is broken, and that's what the reason is. I share this with you because the ballot will probably have that on there, and you may say, well, I don't know about all this. Why are we doing this? That's the quick explanation. When you come, the church conference begins at 7 o'clock. I highly recommend you get there early because you do have to register, just like when you go to vote in a government election for our country. If you are a person who is habitually late, and nobody elbow anybody when I say that, if you get here late, it could be over. Because what I think will happen is the DS will read the ballot, he will invite everybody to vote, the ballots will be collected, and then he will declare the ballot ended. So if you get there late and we've already taken the ballot, even though you're there, likely you will not get to vote. I also recommend that you bring a photo ID because you will have to register. Students, school ID works fine. We do anticipate, because the membership of our church is large, there may be people that come that we haven't seen in church in years, but they're watching and they want to be there to vote. And this is part of it, I don't know for sure how this is going to happen. We have to establish a bar of the conference. That is not a bar in the conference. It is the bar of the conference. To sit in the bar of the conference, you have to have registered as a member and received your ballot. If you're not a member, you may still attend. There will be a gallery. That is what I expect. I'm still waiting to hear back from the DES on what's going to happen. The plan is that we will record it, but we don't intend to live stream it. We will not be in here because we anticipate there won't be enough room in here. We will be in the Community Life Center, just so you're aware of that. When you vote, there are 3 options for voting. Yes, I vote to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. No, I vote to remain in the United Methodist Church, and abstain. Please hear this very clearly. If during the vote you think, I just don't know what to do, I'm going to vote to abstain. because of the ruling of our conference chancellor, any vote for abstention is counted as a no vote. So if you really just can't vote, I would encourage you just don't vote. Because if you abstain, you are voting no. All right, let's pause here and let's see what questions people have. The microphone's over here, and I will tell you, the last time we did this, y'all just need to know I'm going deaf. You will have to talk loudly, or Josh will have to interpret things that I cannot hear. Thank you.
So hopefully, DA, I got several questions here and a final statement for you. You kind of touched on this a little bit about the general conference back in, I guess it was 19, where you had the three plans. I believe in our last meeting there was a one church plan, traditional plan, and then something else. I don't recall.
Connectional conference plan.
Connectional. Can you briefly explain what those three plans were?
Sure. It's a little awkward because two of them don't really exist, but the one church plan was the idea that we would remain one church and every church would decide for itself what it wanted to do. So let's say that St. Andrews said, we don't want to allow gay marriages in our church. We don't want to have homosexual, self-avowed practicing homosexual clergy in our church. Okay, the church could make that stance. That's the church's stance. We're in an appointed system, so if the church said we're not going to do this, the bishop could appoint a pastor who says, but I am going to do this. Or let's reverse those. Let's say that the church said, yeah, we'll allow same-gender weddings in our building, because right now we can't, but we're going to. But a clergy person says, I will not do a same-gender wedding. That creates a real challenge because now the church and the pastor are at odds with each other. And a family could say, well, our church allows it. If you're not going to do it, we'll just invite somebody else. Well, currently, that is not how it works in the United Methodist Church. As a campus minister, if Josh did a wedding, he couldn't just show up at a church and do a wedding. He has to be invited to come do the wedding. So that was kind of the one church plan. We're all going to stay together, but every church and every pastor will decide for themselves, and nobody will be forced to do anything. The traditional plan keeps our statements. The Connectional Conference plan said we're actually going to have, in the United States, we're going to have 3 different conferences. And for lack of any title, you'd have a progressive conference, a centrist conference, and a tradition conference. And so our conference would not be the boundaries of the state of Oklahoma. We would choose which one of those 3 conferences we would belong to, but it keeps everybody United Methodist. The problem with that plan was it had so many constitutional changes that would have to occur that most people just didn't take it seriously.
Yeah.
And technically there was a 4th plan, and the 4th plan was just change everything in the Book of Discipline.
Okay. So
good question.
So was there, I guess, relative to these plans, did they only vote on the one plan, or was there votes on all 3 of them, and this is the only one that had majority, I guess, or? So
there were actually 2 different votes taken. The first vote, the first day of General Conference in St. Louis was Sunday, believe it or not. Y'all were having church. I was driving to St. Louis. I missed Sunday morning, both places. Actually, I didn't. I listened to the live stream while I was driving. And that was time for prayer. If we're going to have this, we're going to be faithful to who we are. We're going to pray. And then the next day, Monday, it was all legislative session. And typically when you go to General Conference, you have several different legislative sessions, the same way the United States government has different legislative groups to look at and examine and make recommendations for, passing bills into laws. In St. Louis, it was one big legislative session. So all these were presented, all these were debated, and at the end of the day, the traditional plan prevailed in the vote for what our stance would be. But that's just in legislative session. The next day then, on Tuesday, was the plenary session where you actually vote what's going to go into the book of discipline. And so the motion was that we adopt the traditional plan because that's what came out of legislative session, but there was a minority report to consider the other two. Those were listened to, but at the end of the day, the traditional plan again prevailed in the vote.
Okay. So one thing I had.
You need to get close. I can hear you better if you do.
Get close? Okay. One thing I had heard relative to all this stuff, that really the only reason the traditional plan passed was really because of our African UMC delegates. They were strongly conservative, I guess. Is that an accurate statement, or they're the ones who kind of pushed it over the top to stay in the traditional plan? So without them, we might have been somewhere else at this point in time, I suppose.
Churches in other parts of the world, and the United Methodist Church is around the globe. Bishops and even pastors like to brag. The sun never sets on the United Methodist Church. It's always shining somewhere. The increase of African delegates to General Conference are like congressional representatives. The more people you have, the more votes you get. Well, the church in the United States is declining, and the church in Africa is growing. The church in the Philippines is growing. So international delegates are increasing in the number of votes while the United States continues to decline.
Okay.
And yes, the gap between the yes votes and the no votes was going like this until 2012. And then it started to go like this again because of international delegates. If this were only a United States issue, it would have changed years ago.
Okay. So another question, you kind of briefly touched on this about the two clergy members in Oklahoma who have apparently violated the Book of Discipline and performed a gay marriage, if you will, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So I know in the other meeting last week that Reverend Tish said that, kind of quote unquote, that the bishop would handle it according to the Book of Discipline. Now I'm kind of wondering, what is in there that they can actually do to them, and is our bishop going to do something in a way that would prevent these occurrences from happening again, whether it's removing the credentials or whatever it may be. I don't know what those options are, in the Book of Discipline.
So let me make sure I understand that what you're asking is, what's the bishop doing about it, and what can we expect? Is that?
I mean, Tish said that, quote, he's going to
He's going to handle it, or
he's going to handle it via the Book of Discipline, and just kind of based on a lot of the things we see going on, I'm kind of going, well, what's that mean? He's going to go, bad boy, bad girl, don't do that again, or you're out of here, or does anybody really know?
That's interesting, because outside of Oklahoma, there have been cases where pastors, for the bishop to do anything, somebody has to file a charge. A judge can see a crime, but until a charge is filed and it comes in the courtroom, am I right on this, Ross? Judge can't do anything about it. So the bishop can't do anything until somebody files a charge against the pastor for doing that. In some conferences in the past, the bishop has said, okay, well, you're not supposed to do that. Take 24 hours without pay and write a paper, and then you're still a pastor. The traditional plan, that was part of what happened, was it actually says, if this happens, here's the course of action that you've got to take. So unlike previous cases, evidently somebody has filed charges, and what the bishop has to do is investigate it. There is a committee on investigation in the conference that does that work. They make a report to the bishop, here's what we discovered, and then the bishop has to decide how will I handle this? Well, the 2019 addendum to the Book of Discipline says, Bishop, this is how you handle it. It doesn't automatically kick somebody out. I believe it's more of a suspension. I haven't read it in a couple of years for the first violation, but repeated violations would lose to the loss of credentials.
Yeah, okay. So one other thing, so I've heard, especially in these last few weeks, that there's been a lot of dubious behavior out there, and one example is some of the stuff that's happened at Duke University, I believe the seminary school there. Third-hand information to me, but the allegations were rather troubling to me. And, I'm kind of wondering, what is our, UMC leadership doing about, preventing some of these behaviors from occurring again? In theory, we're supporting this university. I heard St. Andrews may not actually be supporting them, but the UMC in general is. But their behavior is very questionable. Why is the UMC hierarchy allowing these things to continue with no apparent repercussions? Or are the repercussions just haven't heard of?
So the case you're referring to at Duke, and at this point, let's separate Duke University from the Theological Seminary at Duke. We support the seminary. Historically, the university, yes, but we support the seminary. And they had, do you remember exactly what, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it was a week of worship services where the sermons were given that God is a queer God. A prayer that was a unison prayer was prayed to the great queer one. Language that certainly doesn't fit what we do. The systems of accountability, because that happens at Duke Seminary, is we read about it, we make our response to it, but that's in the South Central jurisdiction, or the Southeast jurisdiction, so they're the ones that have to police that, as it were.
We have no say-so here, really.
As far as doing any action, the only action that people take, because this is what people sometimes do in churches, is to withhold those funds. If we know money's going to support seminaries, we can withhold our money, which is a violation of the Book of Discipline.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't advocate for withholding money as a means of protest.
Okay. So this is really a statement now from me, not really a question, but.
Can y'all hear him okay? Okay.
Do I need to get closer?
Maybe a little bit. They can hear you, but I'm struggling.
Oh, okay. Because every time I get closer, this thing starts squealing a little bit.
I understand.
But my wife and I we've been a member here at St. Andrews since 10 of 93. We didn't make the first service, but we were there at like the second or third. Been here a long time, and we'd been unchurched, our young married life, and after our kids came along, we kind of knew, something was missing in our lives, and, we found St. Andrew. We were looking around for a long time, looking for a church. My wife came from a non-denominational church. I came from a Lutheran church. And so we were, looking for a church that had roots, and a clear doctrine, clear message, and things like that. And, history past, we've been here for 29 years. And all I can say is, me personally, I'm kind of troubled by our UMC leadership. I don't mean St. Andrews. I'm talking the higher level leaderships, where they seem to either be unable to, or maybe they're flat out now refusing to follow the Book of Discipline and discipline clergy or institutions, since they have all, professed that, yeah, we're gonna be UMC, we're gonna follow these rules, we're gonna do these things. And so I'm really troubled by that. And it is a sad day if we do leave the UMC, I mean, I certainly understand why we're doing this because of, unfortunately, the church leadership not doing what they profess that they signed up to do. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. And
yeah, that is what brought us to this point, is some of the examples that you've lifted up. And I can tell you that based on my understanding of people, and some people said, hey, this is how I'm going to vote, and other people say, well, I'm going to vote the other way. I think it troubles all of us no matter which side of the vote we're on. That's what's so troubling about it. And as I said last Tuesday, as long as everything was up here at the general conference level, that nameless, faceless group, we were okay. It's when it changed and now every church has to decide that this becomes troubling.
Quick question. I think if people read the paper this morning, they saw what happened at Church of the Servant. I talked to a friend of mine who was at the vote Sunday, and he made a comment, and I don't know if we can clarify that now, but he said the people that got a ballot and didn't vote, that was counted as a no vote.
Okay, so that's one of the things I'm trying to get clarification on from the district superintendent, because I've heard that too. And if y'all didn't understand the question, it's essentially that if you are given a ballot and you choose not to vote, it has been said that is counted as a abstention. I've got to find that out. That's why I said whatever I tell you tonight may change Thursday night. I think we need to get clarity on that, because we have to count the ballots, how many ballots we give out. And the reason for that is, and I don't even know who's going to be handing out the ballots. That's, again, something I'm trying to find out. If we said, okay, we handed out, 400 ballots, and we took the vote, and only 425 votes came back. Obviously, there's some voter fraud going on somewhere. So as far as how that counts, I think that's a question that needs to be asked on Thursday, because I don't really know the answer. If you take one and you don't want to vote, can you give it back? I don't know the answer to that.
Hi, I'm Harley McPeak, and I was wondering, what is the book of discipline for the global Methodist Church compared to what we've lived with?
So the current book of discipline, have you seen the book of discipline? Yeah, our current book of discipline?
Yeah.
It's thick. You can, if you want to look at the discipline for the Global Methodist Church, go to globalmethodist.org, click on the link for Transitional Book of Doctrine and Disciplines. It is 105 pages long, considerably smaller than what we currently have.
Yeah. And I assume that this book of discipline will cover the clergy, the ordination, the licensing, supervision, and all that. Is it?
Yes.
You're happy with?
Yeah. The ordination process will look different than it does right now, but if you go to the book of discipline, it'll say, here's the questions that have to be asked in examination, and it lays that out for you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
What caused the second vote to occur? Do you understand why that occurred?
Yes. So the question is, why did Church of the Servant have a second vote? Okay. Church of the Servant had their vote for disaffiliation Sunday at 2 o'clock. They took a vote. They had 785 people, somewhere in that range, that voted. They counted the votes, and the vote came back that 64.7% of the church voted to disaffiliate, but you have to have 66.7%. They missed it by 17 votes. Robert's Rule of Orders then allows for a second vote. And so the church asked for a second vote. As you might guess, it was debated, but it only had to pass by simple majority. The church voted to take a second vote. What happened then was after people had voted the first time, some of them left. And so the second vote actually had about 100 fewer people voting than the first vote did. And the number was 66.4%. They missed by 0.3% of disaffiliating, or 3 votes. But Robert's Rule of Orders allowed for a second vote, and so that's why a second vote was taken. They all had to re-register again because they had to get more ballots again. They had to go through the entire process a second time.
So when we come Thursday, we vote, we should not leave. I mean, just let's not say it's going to happen, but
No.
It could happen. We should vote and we should remain until we see the full outcome of the evening.
As nearly as I know, the vote will vote. I don't anticipate it's going to take very long. I think what will happen when we vote is there will be questions for process that can be asked. Then when the ballot is read, which was that paragraph that said for this or this or this, the district superintendent will ask if anybody wants to make a speech for the motion or a speech against the motion. So let's say that somebody gets up and speaks against the motion. Nobody else gets to speak unless somebody wants to speak for the motion. This happened at St. Mark's where Josh used to be in ministry. Somebody got up and made a speech for their vote to disaffiliate. Nobody else spoke, and so, okay, that's it. But you alternate the votes. 3 for, 3 against is probably all that will be allowed. And then we take a vote. I don't anticipate it will take very long. We'll probably hang out. The votes will be counted. I don't even know how that's going to happen because the superintendent hasn't shared that with me yet. And then a report will be made for the ballot results. At that point, I have a hunch it depends on what the vote looks like. If one side of the vote has 80% of the vote and the other only has 20%, they probably would not do a second vote. But if it's close like it was at Church of the Servant, if you really want to vote and you don't want to take a risk of missing the potential of a second vote, yes, you would need to stick around.
Thank you.
Okay. If you have other questions. Oh, Glover. God. I'm late. I told you. I don't preach well to my left most of the time, so I've been focused over here.
As most of you know, my name is Jim Glover, and my wife is Stephanie Glover. This is emotional for me. Stephanie and I came 27 years ago. We were looking for a church, a place that we could call home, a church that believed in the Bible and believed that it was 100% true, a pastor that would support us and our family, and that we could raise our children and know that this church believed in Jesus Christ and what he stood for in the words of the Bible. And we have believed that the whole time. I'm sorry, I'm an emotional guy. And I believe that every one of our pastors that we have had since we have been here were totally supportive of the book of discipline and the Bible. I had a dream. I haven't told DA this.
Can you do that in a Martin Luther King voice?
Yeah. I have been, thank you, that helped me calm down.
That was my purpose.
I had a dream, and it came very clear to me that I needed to reach out to each one of our pastors and ask them if they supported our disaffiliation. So I have called each one of them. And in the process, I found out that David Johnson is in the hospital and had surgery today. So pray for him. But he is out of surgery, and my understanding he's doing better. But he's still at St. Anthony's, so you can send him a good wish. But I talked to, let's start off with, I've talked to Stephanie Greenwald, but I only talked to her through text. And then before that was David Johnson. And then before that was Ron Percival, and of course Bob Feist. I always tell the joke that the reason Stephanie and I are at this church is because we got 2 sets of cookies. We had somebody bring cookies to our house the first week we had come, but then 3 weeks later, Ron Percival came by and brought cookies to us. We dragged him in the house, and we drilled him with all kinds of questions about St. Andrews. And he answered them honestly, and that was the reason, one of the main reasons that we decided to join St. Andrews. Then I talked to Bob Feist, and every one of them have given me permission to say that they 100% support our disaffiliation because they believe that the Methodist Church is unfortunately and sadly heading the wrong direction. And that if we wait, that it would be the wrong decision. And this is a prayerful decision, and tears in my eyes. I don't want to see this happen. But if you came to this church for that very reason, then there shouldn't be in question the way you should vote. But if you came for other reasons, and I've had people call me and tell me that I'm wrong, that if your reason is to change the book of discipline or to change the Bible, then you shouldn't be here, because that's not what we believe. So that's what I have to say. And I thank everybody, and thank you, DA.
Again, whatever side of this you're on, this is emotional for everybody. And I do, whether you agree with my take or not, I'm still your pastor as long as you're here. With that in mind, our leadership has said not only do they recommend we vote to disaffiliate, but they also recommend that if we disaffiliate, we join the Global Methodist Church. And there's a number of things that could be said about this. I have a list of 6 reasons for joining the GMC. The first is doctrinal consistency. It's not unusual if you were to travel around Oklahoma or even travel around farther and you saw a United Methodist Church and you went in there, you may not hear the same doctrine preached by every pastor. Now, we don't all agree about the same stuff. Josh and I have disagreements with stuff. David and I had disagreements. Stephanie and I had disagreements. But they were minor disagreements. There will be greater doctrinal consistency in the Global Methodist Church, not just in Oklahoma, but globally, in Africa, in the Philippines, in Romania, even in Texas. There will be doctrinal consistency. The second is a lean bureaucracy. A lot of the money we spend in apportionments, again, it goes to these boards and agencies, and it goes to places that we don't ever see the benefit of that. When I was in Tampa in 2012 at General Conference, I was sitting in the legislative session for the Board of Higher Education and Ministry. And as a part of that, there was a man there that said, I would like to share this document because it shows how much money has been given to the seminaries and how many United Methodist pastors they actually send to our churches. And they wouldn't let him do it, but I was certainly glad to get a copy of it. And the one I remember was Boston School of Theology. The millions of dollars that were sent over the course of 4 years to that seminary, you know how many United Methodist pastors they produced? 6. Doesn't really help us accomplish our mission. The bureaucracy is leaner, apportionments would go down considerably to allow us to continue to invest money. Again, if we said we want to support Skyline, we don't lose that. If we want to support Circle of Care, we don't lose that. It's just not, I want to be careful because I don't want you to misinterpret this. It's a we want to, not a we have to. Third, there is no trust clause in the Global Methodist Church. The other day somebody said, what happens if we don't like the Global Methodist Church? We leave. If we join and we don't like it, we leave. There's no trust clause. They're not going to threaten our property or anything like that. And fortunately in Oklahoma, there's no threat to take away our property. I think that speaks to the integrity of our bishop. And trust me, I get as frustrated with the bishop as any pastor in our conference, but he is clear. We follow the book of discipline, and we're not going to enforce the trust clause. This one is one I have mixed feelings about. The local church has more input on clergy selection. So when Bob Feist left, the bishop said, we're sending D.A. Bennett. And when that happened, I came and met with church leadership. And after that meeting, church leadership could have said, no way. Or I could have said, no way. Both parties have that option. But the bishop said, this is who we want to come, and that was kind of it. Someday, no time that I have planned in the near future, I'm going to retire. Thank you for not applauding. Who are you going to get? Well, if we're still a United Methodist Church, the bishop will send you somebody. If we're in the Global Methodist Church, the bishop will still make an appointment in consultation with the church saying, these are people we want to interview to be our pastor. The church would have a more active process. And any clergy in the conference that said, you know what, Bennett's retiring, I want to go to St. Andrews, they can apply to be the pastor here. And I do have a short list of people who ask me those questions regularly, just so y'all know. Number 5 is limited terms for bishops. In the United Methodist Church, when you're a bishop for life. And years ago, a study was done by an independent group, and they said part of the problem with the United Methodist Church is your retired bishops won't get out of the way and shut up. That was basically what they said. In the GMC, when a bishop is elected, they have a term limit. I believe it's 8 years. And if they're not ready to retire, they just go back to being a pastor in a church because we're not going to have all the bureaucracy so they can be a church bureaucrat. I think that's a plus. And then the big one is systemic accountability. It does have built into the doctrine and disciplines. If there are violations of our discipline, this is what happens. We don't have that in the United Methodist Church. This is my biggest struggle with our denomination is people break the rules and they're told you can't do that, but there's no mechanism of enforcement that can remove people that need to be removed. I can also tell you about clergy. As long as I'm ordained and I haven't retired and I haven't reached mandatory retirement age, the bishop has to do something with me. The GMC, that is not the case. There's no guarantee that a pastor has an appointment. Now, you may be wondering, how did we get Josh? Well, Josh's ordination is different from mine. I'm an elder. I choose to itinerate wherever the bishop serves me. Josh is a deacon. That makes him a free agent. He gets to go and find places, or sometimes places can go and find him. I recommend that between now and Thursday you spend some time in deep prayer. I'll be honest with you. I was ready to stand up here and say, I want to call us to pray and fast tomorrow, but selfishly, I don't want to fast tomorrow. I'm not eating much right now anyway, and when I get hungry, I feel like I need to eat. But if you feel so led to do that, do that. But we need to be in prayer. The biggest concern I have about all this is when I look at what happened at Church of the Servant, 3 votes that they missed it by. A minority decides what that church is going to do. Now, they will vote again in the spring. They will have another chance to take a vote next year about disaffiliating. But let's just imagine, once again, the vote fails and they don't reach the threshold. What do you think that 66% of the church members will do? And that is my fear, is that whatever the vote takes, and Victor asked me last week, he said, how's your church going to vote? I said, Victor, I don't know. Sunday morning, I will still be your pastor. We will still sing. We will still pray. We will love. We will care. We will overcome. Whatever happens Thursday night, Sunday morning, we will still be the same church. And that is not this building. That is us as a people. I just preached a sermon series on that. So if you missed that series, it's only 14 hours worth of worship you have to listen to. But we are the people of God. And we find ourselves bound together in a community of faith. And we have to make a decision. We need to make that decision prayerfully. We need to make that decision honestly, and we need to make that decision respecting anybody that may disagree with us, because we are part of the church. So that's it. That's all I have. If you have other questions, I'll stick around for a while. You can call me, you can email me. But I want to pray before we leave. So would you all bow your heads and just give a moment to sit in silence. Holy God, when we read your word, on the side of every challenge, there's another side of opportunity. When Moses came to the Red Sea, there was still a promised land. When David faced a giant, there was still a nation to rule. When Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, there was still the next day. And when Jesus died, you raised him from the dead. And God, we confess that sometimes as your people that are part of the church, we don't always get it right. We're sorry for that. We're sorry, oh God, and we repent that the struggles in our tradition have brought us to this place. But we believe that you are a God that makes all things different than they were before. Whether it's new or whether it's renewed, God, you're able to do that. Give us such hearts, oh God, that our number one desire is to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Knit our hearts together in love for all people. And at the end of our time, oh God, may our life bring glory and honor to you. And we do ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Go in peace.